In your view, Ali, is it likely that we're going to see a deal being struck here before the midterms? This is becoming increasingly political, but also increasingly complex for the US, the West, and Iran to get any sort of progress moving forward.
Right. Well, the IAEA issue has emerged late over the summer as the key issue undermining the ability to get to a final outcome. Whether we're going to get a deal before the midterms is now very much unlikely. You had a final text from the European Union that is hosting the negotiations. The text went back and forth, but this latest time when Iran sent its version of the text back to the United States, the Western countries expressed some concern about what Iran was demanded. They said it's a step backward. So right now, we're not really sure when we're going to get to an agreement. Of course, this level of pessimism about reaching an agreement is something we've seen really throughout the negotiations. The ultimate problem is neither side really has a plan B. Neither side has a way of walking away from the table. The United States needs Iran to cut back its nuclear program, and Iran needs sanctions relief. So both sides are going to stay at the table and they're going to keep negotiating, but it's probably going to be a bit longer until we actually see an agreement.
Ali, Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi is expected to meet his Chinese and Russian counterparts in Uzbekistan on Thursday. How concerned are you by Iran's increasing ties with China and Russia? And why would the United States even want to try and negotiate a deal with a country that is also cozying up to a country, Russia, that it is basically in a proxy war with, and a country, China, that it is in deep strategic competition with as well? Obviously, that's a concern for the United States, right? And if it isn't, it should be.
Well, sure. I mean, there are a lot of countries in the world who have China as their top trade partner. Iran and Russia are also brought together by pressure from the West. So there is a sort of anti-sanctions coalition coming together in Asia between Iran, China, and Russia. This isn't really much of an alliance. All of these countries have their own problems with each other, so it's somewhat of an uneasy relationship. Like the trade relationship between Iran and Russia might skyrocket now, but it's virtually nothing at this point. So right now, Iran is trying to become a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement. That process seems to be going along a lot quicker than previously expected, but it's not going to mean that Iran does not need the sanctions relief. Iran sells some oil to China, gets some factory inputs, but the relationship between the two countries is very much one-dimensional. And in order for that relationship to grow, you need sanctions relief, because a lot of companies, even state-owned enterprises in China, never mind across Asia, don't have the kind of appetites for sanctions risk that the Chinese government may have at this point. Ultimately, the two sides have to find a way to make an agreement. Their other geopolitical disagreements have to stay separate. And if there is sanctions relief for Iran, then Iran could potentially have other options of, say, trading and investment with the West. Of course, that seems a bit unlikely considering the precedent Trump set, but it could allow Iran to have a more balanced relationship between East and West.
And of course, the ultimate goal here is to ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. But the United States is also going to have to convince wary allies in this part of the world, like Israel, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, that they're going to be safer under a new Iran deal. How exactly can the United States do that? And how is this impacting relations in this part of the world?
Well, there has been a lot of diplomatic activity across the Persian Gulf. So Iran and Saudi Arabia had a round of talks in Baghdad that seemed to have gone quite well. Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates sent their ambassadors back to Tehran just in the last month. So this diplomacy has been going well. All of these countries, some of whom cheerleaded the U.S. leaving the JCPOA, are now basically saying that they would like the U.S. to come back into the JCPOA. The problem is that leaving the JCPOA created multiple levels of tensions across the region. So you had sanctions and nuclear escalation directly between Iran and the United States. But what you also had was them targeting each other's interests and allies across the region in this sort of tit-for-tat kinetic action, which involved Iran targeting some of the interests pertaining to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, countries that look to the United States for security. Right. So those countries are already seem to be fairly certain that being in the JCPOA is better for them than the JCPOA not existing or collapsing. As far as Israel is concerned, right, Iran and Israel are going to have a very negative relationship. Whether or not the JCPOA exists is not really necessarily going to make that much of a difference, but is because Iran isn't racing towards building a nuclear weapon anyway. But at the end of the day, over the last few years, I mean, Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, tried to argue that the sanctions have cut down Iran's resources, the resources it would have to spend in Syria and whatnot. But that hasn't really been the case. Iran has still been advancing its interests across the region. Israel obviously would rather the sanctions remain than for them to go away, but that's not necessarily what the European countries and the United States need right now.